CGTN. Thank you so much for your company, and bye for now.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: questions over the safety of the submarine which claimed the lives of all 5 people on board. Questions too over the regulation of private sector deep-sea explorations. Our other headlines: $100 billion promised to poorer countries to help fight climate change. Is it too little too late as our planet heats up? China's premier urges China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty. And leaders of the United States and India hail a new chapter in their relationship after signing new defense and trade agreements. Investigations are continuing into the loss of a tourist submarine thought to have imploded on its way to the wreck of the Titanic, killing all 5 people on board. Questions are being asked about the Titan sub's experimental design, safety standards, and lack of certification. The United States Coast Guard said debris consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber had been found in the search area off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. Well, the Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther is in Boston in the United States. Philip, can you give us any more details of what happened? The US Navy appears to have detected this implosion, as they're calling it, on Sunday.
Yeah, and that gives us a very new timeline that does suggest that during that whole big international search effort, there really doesn't seem to have been any hope to find those 3 men alive. It's the US Navy that says that a top-secret acoustic system detected what it describes as an anomaly, more or less exactly at the same time that the Titan submersible first went missing. Of course, it took a while for that disappearance to be made official and to be declared to the US Coast Guard, and it was only then that the Navy went back to that acoustic data, analyzed it, and that noticed that there was that anomaly that most likely was the sound of that implosion. So once the Navy analyzed that data, it shared it with the US Coast Guard, who was based here in Boston and was coordinating this whole search effort because what was detected was not deemed to be, quote, definitive, says the US Navy, the search continued. Maybe there was that glimmer of hope to still find those 5 men alive, and that is why those 3 whole days of huge search efforts did continue, of course, with a tragic ending in the end.
Does a tragedy like this lead to change? There are many questions about what went wrong, aren't there?
Yeah, and the US Coast Guard this morning answering that question to a certain degree, saying that it's too early to say whether any policy changes will emerge from this. It does say that those kinds of changes can take months or years, but they do tend to come after tragedies like this one. One thing that is not yet known, says the US Coast Guard, is who exactly is going to have jurisdiction over a possible investigation. Would it be the Canadian Coast Guard, the US Coast Guard, other federal agencies? That has not yet been decided. But you're right, there are a lot of questions that are being asked and have been asked over the last few days, and indeed before this even happened, by scientists, by experts, by those who were on board this submersible on other expeditions and even by one employee. The questions being asked are, for example, whether this vessel really was safe enough to go to the depths of the wreckage of the Titanic, even though it successfully did so several times. And then also there's the question over certification. Did this company really try to get the certification it could have got and it maybe should have had? Those are questions that are most likely going to come up during an investigation, again, that is still to begin.
Thank you very much for that. Our correspondent, Philip Crowther, from the Associated Press in Boston. The world is warming and the evidence is now tangible with earlier and more frequent heat waves right across the globe. There have been scores of deaths and hospitalizations in India, and temperatures have also soared in China, with Beijing upgrading its warning for hot weather to its highest level. Our correspondent Li Jingyi reports.
The world has experienced its hottest ever first 11 days of June. The European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service said that average air temperatures went over 1.5 degrees Celsius for the first time compared to the pre-industrial early 20th century. In northern China, an orange alert for high temperatures was renewed. The capital, Beijing, is among the hardest hit. The highest level red alert was raised on Friday, the city's first red alert in 9 years. The temperature in Beijing soared to 41.1 degrees Celsius on Thursday afternoon, the second highest reading since reliable records began in Beijing, just shy of the record 41.9 in 1999.
I never thought Beijing was going to be hotter than Nanjing. The highest temperature in Beijing went up to 40 degrees Celsius.
Shandong province is also on a red alert, with temperatures surging over 40 degrees in 26 regions. A number of service stations have been set up for outdoor workers to take a rest.
They give us some respite in this scorching summer so that we can do our jobs and serve the city.
In India, the heat has led to cases of heat stroke hospitalizations and deaths. The cities north and east have seen temperatures of up to 46 degrees this week. Officials in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh are probing the deaths of nearly 60 people that reports attributed to searing temperatures.
I have been doing this job even when the temperatures rose above 45 degrees Celsius. This is the first time life has been so excruciating. We might face more problems from the scorching heat.
Other parts of Asia have seen record temperatures since early May, such as over 44 degrees in Vietnam, over 43 degrees in Laos, and 41 degrees in Bangkok. The heat wave is also searing North America and Europe. Tens of millions in the southern United States are under extreme heat advisories. Some cities in Texas have seen temperatures spiking over 45 degrees Celsius. In Europe, Spain registered its hottest spring on record this year, and the second driest ever. In France, 2/3 of the water tables are below normal levels in June. Li Jingyi, CGTN.
China's Premier Li Qiang has urged China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty. He was speaking at a summit in France, which has been looking at ways to ease the debt burden on some of the world's most vulnerable countries and help them cope with the impact of higher temperatures. France's President Macron says wealthy countries have finally agreed on long-promised climate funding worth $100 billion. But he added that the private sector must play a bigger role.
We have finalized the long-awaited $100 billion climate finance pledge. We have stepped up efforts to seal this funding that was originally promised in 2021. But we must mobilize even more private financing. There is so much private finance available, but simply put, it is not heading in the right direction towards middle-income and poorer countries.
Let's head to our correspondent Ken Brown in Paris. Ken, what exactly has been agreed at this summit, and what is its significance?
Yes, well, there's been a lot of big talk in the lead up to this summit about the shake-up of the world financial system. We heard French President Macron calling for a finance shock. We also heard the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, talking about a reconfiguration of the global financial architecture. The aim is to address poverty and inequality and set a roadmap for the future. Now, today we finally saw some solid numbers, $200 billion for the World Development Bank over the next 10 years, $100 billion set aside by wealthy nations in a climate pledge that you mentioned earlier. That will go towards protecting biodiversity and the world's forests, also part of those funds. That $100 billion pledge is long overdue. It was one of the sticking points at COP27 in Egypt, and many countries from the global south said that it was a symbol of how the wealthy north was simply not living up to its promises and not putting money on the table. So that is definitely a positive step. We've also seen the IMF announce $100 billion becoming available in special drawing rights. That's a kind of global reserve currency that will also go towards climate resilience and subsidized lending to low-income countries. Now, while all this has been done, in reality, we're still far off what impoverished and vulnerable countries needed. Guterres proposed an annual fund of $500 billion to address inequality. Yesterday, we heard from Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He said that we need a robust and predictable financial safety net. He called for more grants and below-market lending. He said African countries are facing an unprecedented funding squeeze, which has aggravated vulnerabilities. So positive steps, but a reordering of the world's financial system might be a little bit far off yet.
Ken, briefly, we also heard from both the US Treasury Secretary and China's Premier Li Qiang. What was said?
Yeah, right here in the Palais Brongniart behind me, we heard China's Premier Li Qiang speak, along with US Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen. Li talked about EU and Chinese relations being at a new starting point. He urged China and Europe to rise above differences to work towards world peace. In terms of the summit, Li said China is ready to help developing nations in any way it can through direct loans or potentially supporting the global financial bodies like the IMF and the World Bank. He also encouraged multinationals to make more direct investment in emerging economies. Li reiterated his call to keep global supply chains safe and open, to push forward with free trade, saying that protectionism would hurt the global economy. We heard from Janet Yellen also. She talked about the need for the US and China to work together on the world's pressing issues.
Pleased to share this stage with colleagues from around the world, including Premier Li Qiang. As I said in a speech earlier in the year, as the world's two largest economies, we have a responsibility to work together on global issues. It's something we can do and something the world expects of us.
And as we can see, a further lowering of tensions between the two world's biggest economies. That's always positive news. Today is the end of Premier Li Qiang's 6-day visit here in Europe, where he signed a number of accords on green, nuclear and aerospace projects, both in Germany and in France. China and Europe are aiming at friction-free trade and cooperation moving forward. This summit was a real highlight, as some progress has been made on helping vulnerable nations.
Ken, thanks for that. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Paris. Well, the former Prime Minister of Belgium, Yves Leterme, told me about his expectations for the climate pledge.
Right, that there has been a range of international summits with lots of pledges, but then after 6 months, a year, 2 years, we see that the pledges are not followed up by real commitments and by transfer of money. And so I think Macron, as the inviting host, is very conscious of that. He said that also in interviews. So I think they will take care of that. I hope so, because it's crucial.
We've seen a rather mixed bag, if I can put it like that, when it comes to geopolitical relationships this week. I mean, how important is it that the world's two largest economies work together on this, that they're on the same page?
I think it's important that China and the US work closely together. It's not sufficient, though. I'm not such a strong believer in the balance of powers between US and China. I think if we really want to revive, redynamize the multilateral framework and multilateralism as such, we have to come to a real, more pluralistic approach. I think G20 is a better setting for that. So I think it's a good, interesting first step if China and US again manage to have a connection, have a dialogue, a respectful, fair dialogue, open dialogue. So that's good, but it's not sufficient. I think we should break out of this bipolar structure of geopolitics.
You're a seasoned political observer, a former prime minister with substantial experience in the international political field. I mean, how do you evaluate Europe's current relationship with China in what's frankly been a rather difficult time? And what is your outlook for this relationship over the coming years?
I think in a couple of decades we will look back at the period so to say, 1995 to 2015, more or less, as the golden decades, the two golden decades of EU-China relations. I think it's important now that we resume that path of win-win cooperation. The concept of shared societies is a good concept to promote, and I think that on behalf, at the side of the European Union, we really should integrate in whatever decision-making on key domains, key issues, that the EU only has a chance to tackle its challenges and to tackle global challenges, to be productive in that field, under the condition that it, very well cooperates with China. It is one thing, for instance, to announce very ambitious targets, objectives in terms of CO2 emission reduction, but you have to draw as a consequence that you have very constructively to cooperate with China. And for instance, that institutional frameworks, treaties like the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, but also in other domains that you have to have a more constructive attitude. I think an important step was already taken to not to talk anymore about decoupling. It's more now about de-risking. But please don't abuse the fair security concerns and the defense of some interests of European citizens. Don't mix it up with pure protectionism.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, harvest time for bamboo leaves used to make traditional food. For farmers in China, this is one of the busiest times of the year.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Questions over the safety of the submarine, which claimed the lives of all 5 people on board. Questions, too, over the regulation of private sector deep-sea explorations. Our other headlines: $100 billion is promised to poorer countries in the fight against climate change during a summit in Paris. And China's premier urges China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to meet top United States officials and business leaders on the final day of his visit to Washington. Modi has held talks with President Joe Biden and attended a state dinner at the White House. The two sides hailed a new era in their relationship and signed deals on microchips, minerals, tech and defence. Our correspondent Nathan King reports.
Yeah, all around the White House you've seen India and the US flags. He's addressed the US Congress for the second time, only the third leader to have a state visit with this very, very lavish dinner going on behind me as well. And in the hard-nosed meetings, really, the US reaching out to India, both diplomatically, economically, and militarily. Let's take a listen to US President Biden.
Together, we're unlocking a shared future of what I believe to be unlimited potential. And with this visit, we're demonstrating once more how India and the United States are collaborating on nearly every human endeavor and delivering progress across the board.
Now, as you know, India, like many Asian countries, are going under a transformational shift. It's now the most populous country in the world, according to statistics, and its economy is growing amongst the fastest in the world. Now, obviously, the US wants to decouple, de-risk, whatever language it uses, from China. They see India as a big opportunity, and India sees an opportunity in this, from semiconductors to space. Let's listen to the Indian Prime Minister.
By increasing our cooperation in fields such as artificial intelligence, semiconductors, space, quantum, and telecom, we are creating a strong and futuristic partnership.
Yeah, the White House and New Delhi essentially launching this technological partnership. They call it for the 21st century. Three big US semiconductor firms either announcing big investment in India or ability to train 60,000 Indian engineers when it comes to semiconductors. We have General Electric setting up a facility to produce jet engines using technology that they don't even share with Japan. Remember, back in the day, the US refused to share technology with India over defense because of its closeness with Russia, which still continues. And Ukraine didn't really come up that much, even though India has abstained from votes in the United Nations against the US, continues to import a huge amount of Russian oil and buy Russian defense equipment. But, you know, the elephant in the room was not Indian, it was China. And essentially, the US see India as a potential counterweight to China. They share a border. There's going to be drone technology sold to India, which could help with that. And also playing up organizations like the Quad, which India, the US, Australia, and Japan are in. But you can expect also some problems with the relationship. I mentioned Ukraine, but human rights being one of them. Even though India is touted as the world's biggest democracy, the US is, especially behind the scenes, there's a lot of backsliding, treatment of Muslim minority in India, but it's hundreds of millions, and you don't hear the word Kashmir mentioned at all. So this is very much an alliance of convenience. The US wanted to put human rights at the heart of its foreign policy, the Biden administration coming in, but it looks like when it comes to India, it's really using its head. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
More than 200 migrants have been rescued from 4 boats near Spain's Canary Islands. The deadly Atlantic migration route is typically used by migrants from sub-Saharan Africa looking to find refuge in Europe. The rescue happened a day after migrant charities said they feared more than 30 people had died after their inflatable dinghy sank on the same route. Twitter will comply with tough new EU laws on fake news, propaganda and online crime. It agreed the move a day after European Commission officials visited the firm's San Francisco headquarters to stress test its capacity to operate legally in Europe. Other tech giants like Google and Meta have signed up to the code, which comes into force in August. Facebook and Instagram users in Canada will soon be unable to access online news via both social media sites. The country's Online News Act, requiring internet giants to pay news publishers, has been approved by the Senate. The two companies call the proposals unsustainable, saying news has no economic value to them. Dengue fever is on the rise in Europe. The continent recorded 71 locally caught cases last year. That's almost as many as in the previous 11 years. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control blamed climate change for an increase in mosquitoes carrying the virus. The cases recorded in 2022 were mainly in France. The Dragon Boat Festival in China coincides with the harvest season for bamboo leaves, which are used to make traditional foods. For leaf farmers, it's one of the busiest and most profitable times of the year. Our correspondent Jung Song-woo reports.
It's usually moist and sweltering in Sichuan province by the time the Dragon Boat Festival falls. But that doesn't stop farmers from cutting and collecting the leaves used for wrapping glutinous rice dumplings. In most provinces in southern China, people wrap rice dumplings using the larger bamboo leaves from the wild. But in Sichuan's Meishan, there are 3 different leaves that the farmers grow on a large scale. The picking season lasts about a month, usually starting from April and ending after the Dragon Boat Festival.
Well, the farmers usually cut off leaves using sickles like this one in my hand. And this ant beside me can collect 10,000 leaves every day, even the weather is poor.
The ant Shen Xiu'e has been growing the leaves for 12 years. She farms nearly 1 hectare of them, bringing a sizable income for her family every year.
Leaf business has increased my income. I used to grow crops in this area, but they'd be wiped out by strong winds before the harvest. Then I started to grow wrapping leaves. I mainly grow leaves with big stripes. 100 leaves can be sold for 13 yuan, so they're more valuable compared to those with tiny stripes. I can earn 80,000 yuan during picking season.
Besides farmers like Shen Xiu'e, who only grows and sells leaves, some farmers also deliver them to transfer stations in the township. The leaves are then sold to other areas within Sichuan province, as well as neighboring provinces like Yunnan and Guizhou.
I collect leaves every day from several households. I can collect millions of leaves during the busiest period, but now the number is about 200,000. It's tiring, but I think it's worth helping farmers sell their products. The leaves earn me more than 10,000 yuan in a picking month.
Over 1,200 households in Suishan Township are growing the leaves, greatly stimulating the local economy.
So far, the farmers have sold hundreds of millions of leaves with an output value of nearly 8 million yuan. The wrapping leaves not only play a role in increasing people's income, but also offer beautiful scenery for people around their houses because they're always green.
The official of Suishan Township is now helping households to develop cooperatives, enhancing the industrial chain of the leaf business to promote rural revitalization. Zheng Song, CGTN, Sichuan Province.
The headlines again. Questions over the safety of the submarine which claimed the lives of all 5 people on board. Questions too over the regulation of private sector deep-sea explorations. Our other headlines, $100 billion is promised to poorer countries at a summit in Paris to help fight climate change. And China's premier urges China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.